Well, this week marks exactly 3 years since President Obama signed his signature domestic legislation into law. The 2010 Affordable Care Act, now commonly known as Obamacare. And in just a few months, the law will take full effect. And even after 3 years, uncertainty remains. According to the latest Fox News poll, the law's popularity has continued to drop. 30% now say they believe the law should be repealed entirely. Another 25% want it repealed in part, and you can see that is an uptick on the repeal entirely from October 2010. Just a bit of an uptick, but an uptick. Joining me now to discuss it, Simon Rosenberg, who is president and founder of the New Democrat Network and a former campaign advisor for President Bill Clinton. Phil Kerpen, who is president of American Commitment and has been studying the health care law. And Mark Thiessen, who's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for the Washington Post, and former chief speechwriter for President Bush. I didn't know it was chief speechwriter. We never say that. I thought we were just promoting you, but well, that's impressive. All right,
I appreciate the battlefield promotion, Megan.
Let me start with Phil. Who I should say, I know from talking to Phil in prior segments, he is not a huge fan of Obamacare, but he is one of the few people who I think actually truly understands it. And so, Phil, you are an important voice on this panel, and I hope I haven't mischaracterized your feelings, but can you just tell us, looking forward now, as this law is about to go full bore. I mean, it's coming. What are the main concerns right now you have about the rollout from this point forward?
Well, look, Megan, we've already seen a lot of the major elements of this law fail completely. The Class Act, long-term care insurance never got off the ground. The co-ops have now been defunded and blocked. We've seen a lot of the major elements basically fall by the wayside. I think the administration is focused on two things, the two biggest elements of this law, which is getting the exchanges up and running for this new middle-class health care entitlement up to 400% of the poverty level, and convincing states to do the Medicaid expansion. And this is where the major fight's going to be, to kind of get those two huge pieces off the ground on schedule. In particular, the exchanges, which are supposed to be ready for open enrollment October 1st. The federal government's going to run 26 of them because states opted out. They kind of vetoed having any part of this. And HHS is scrambling. They won't testify and explain where they are in this process or if they're going to be able to make that deadline, if they're going to be able to enroll people. And it looks like we're headed for a bit of a train wreck when we get to the fall, because I don't think they're going to be ready.
The exchanges are the things I've been referring to as Expedia.com type websites, you know, that you would go to try to sign up for health insurance if you don't have it. And you go on and you give your age and you give some of your medical history, and then they sort of say, well, this is the plan that you might need, and discuss whether you are eligible for the federal subsidy. So this is how you're going to have to do it, or you're going to have to pay a fine if you don't get coverage. Simon, what are the real consequences of this if those exchanges are not up and running, you know, as they're supposed to be by October 1st so that people can be insured by January? What will happen?
Well, they won't be ready. You know, I mean, I think this is there are a lot of big changes coming in American healthcare. And, you know, I don't think it's going to go like any rollout of anything that happens in our lives. It isn't going to go perfect. And there are going to be things that we're going to have to learn from and make better. But I think the premise of this was that the old healthcare system was unacceptable. Costs were rising too fast. Too many people were uninsured. We had to do something. The administration has put together as a thoughtful and serious and perhaps complicated plan, and it's going to start getting implemented now, but I think it is going to bring more people into the system. It's already started to slow costs in the system. We've already seen that. And hopefully it's going to accelerate innovation, which will help bring the internet and other high tech to this world in a way that it simply hasn't at this point.
And the internet is a large part of those exchanges, and one of the big questions about how are they, for the states who have said, all right, you do it, feds. The feds didn't really budget for doing it for 26 states. They didn't really have it set up such that it would be so nationalized, and yet they're in a position where they're going to have to. Mark, I want to ask you, because there was a report out from ADP talking about its concerns about job losses, that employers, now that it's, you know, what is it, the rubber's hitting the road, that the employers are really going to start cutting back on jobs, potentially, because if you go over 50 employees now, it's going to cost you some money.
That's exactly right. And look, the New York Times just featured a story about this company in San Diego called, it's a bakery, and they have 95 employees, and they make about $200,000 a year in profit. And so their options under Obamacare, and I've got a little handy chart here.
Oh, I love the whiteboard.
If they pay the insurance, it'll cost them $108,000. That's the equivalent of a 54% tax on their profits. If they pay the Obamacare penalties, that's $130,000. This is a company that makes $200,000 a year. So they pay $130,000. That's the equivalent of a 65% tax. Or they can lay off 40 to 50 employees and get off the Obamacare radar screen. These are the choices that are being. First of all, how do we justify as a country putting a small business that's trying to create jobs in that situation in the first place? Second of all, thousands of businesses across the country are facing this exact same problem. When they hire the 50th worker, they all of a sudden have to pay a $40,000 penalty under Obamacare if they don't provide the insurance. So a fast food joint usually makes an average profit of about $50,000. A $40,000 penalty, that's like an 80% tax. So the point is we're supposed to be creating jobs here. We're coming out of the worst recovery in American history, and we're putting these mandates on these small businesses that are struggling to create jobs and making their lives more difficult.
But Phil, Obamacare supporters say that is sort of Chicken Little stuff. The sky is falling, and these employers are not likely to lay off huge portions of their workforce because that's how you grow. That's how you do business in America, with added bodies, added productivity. And they predict that these predictions of mass layoffs and people being kicked out of their jobs will fall flat.
Well, look, I think that the law is rife with perverse incentives, and on the margin, they do make a difference. The fast-growing, innovative companies of the future that, operate on relatively high margins or are funded by venture capital and aren't even worried about profitability yet, this is not going to be a big factor for them. But the small business, like that bakery example, or people restaurant business or other franchises, they're going to see a limit to their growth. They're not going to open one more location, or they're going to potentially consider closing a location because it affects their costs on the margin. There are other perverse incentives. It discourages full-time work from a worker perspective. It discourages marriage because the rest of your family can become ineligible for the credits. A lot of these perverse incentive problems were actually identified by Obama administration officials. David Gamage in the Treasury Department warned about a lot of these perverse incentives, but they were trying to limit the overall cost of the bill, or at least the apparent overall cost of the bill, and so they put a lot of these features in there.
Simon, for me, it's come down to, in a lot of these segments, how the law is definitely going to help a lot of people who didn't have insurance and people who had pre-existing conditions, who, through no fault of their own, they find out they have breast cancer, then they change employees. Next thing I know, the cancer's not covered. It's going to help those people. But will it help the people who already had insurance, or will those people wind up in a worse spot? That's been the big mystery, the big question about Obamacare. How do you see this shaking out?
Sure. I think keep in mind when we talk about small businesses, there are millions of small businesses, including the one that I run, that provide health insurance now for their workers. And so they're doing, those companies are doing fine. There are plenty of successful small businesses that are doing the right thing and giving and looking out for their employees and making sure that they and their families are healthy. I think that's the kind of businesses we want in the U.S., right? So the second thing, Megan, on the question about what's going to happen, with everybody else, is that I will give you one thing that I think will come out of this that will be good for everybody, which is we're going to have more labor mobility. It means that if you're right now there are millions of employees all across the country who are stuck in a job that they don't want to stay at any longer because they are worried that if they leave that job that they're going to lose health insurance for their families. You're not going to have to worry about that anymore. And I think that it's going to help foster entrepreneurship. It's going to bring older workers into smaller startup companies. It's going to have a huge impact on the ability of workers to have greater determination over their own careers. I think that is a clear net benefit that's going to come from this. So I think we're all going to benefit
Mark,
from
I'll give you the last word.
Healthcare bill.
Yeah, you're going to have labor mobility out the door. I mean, look, the reality is if you're a small business and you have 49 employees and you want to hire the 50th employee, it's going to cost you a $12 an hour job is going to cost you $52 an hour for that same job. And so you're not going to hire the 50th employee. You're not going to hire people who are planning to hire workers are not going to hire them. People who have workers now are going to make them part-time. This is going to be a job-killing machine. And so I'm glad Simon thinks there's going to be mobility in the workforce. That mobility is going to be more people in part-time jobs or out of work as a result of these mandates.
Yeah, we'll leave it on that happy note. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I appreciate seeing you all.
Thanks, Megan.